All right, so I got the stream going, so we'll go ahead and kick this off. So welcome to our small little intimate conversation on, trial add-ons. So I'm doing this at the request of the rookies group. So if folks want to rewatch this, they can just find the VOD link in one of our channels on FTC. So let me go ahead and just share my screen and we'll kind of go through some things. You guys can check that stream out and let me know if that's coming in.
It looks good to me.
Okay. All right, so here I am in my house, and we'll talk primarily, although, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of different add-ons. I'm not going to go through like what I use. I'm really just going to keep this laser focused on just some of the more common trial add-ons that you'll run into in most trial teams, particularly if you start to get into like the VAT hard modes or progression trials. Your trial leaders will often request you use some of these, or you'll find that most of your team members in those type of groups will be running these. And these are the ones that I would recommend. So we'll talk about Wizard's Wardrobe, Crutch Alerts, Elms Markers, Audi Support Icons, Hodors, Shrindar, which is probably less common to a lot of folks, and then Combat Metronome, which is really geared just for DPS. So Wizard's Wardrobe, and I'll bring up this. Let's see. So I've got it hotkeyed. We'll go ahead and run the settings. This is one of several different add-ons that are available to players that want to automatically switch either skills or gear or both. And in the case of wizards, it will also change your CP setup as well as your food buff, all at the click of a button or completely automated. Now, I used to use what's Alpha Gear 2, which still a lot of people play. In fact, if it wasn't for some of the things that I don't like about Alpha Gear, I probably would still be using it because this one has a lot of flexibility. What it doesn't have is it doesn't swap your CP automatically. It doesn't swap your food buff. And probably the worst part about Alpha Gear is when you change from one setup to the other, sometimes your back bar, the bar that you're not on, the skills won't swap over correctly, which a lot of people complain about, including myself. And then when I switched to wizards, I've never, in the last 5 or 6 months that I've been using wizards, had never had that problem. So that's my go-to now, and this is what I always recommend people use if they want to automate this. So oftentimes in trials, you'll have your raid lead tell you, okay, get into your trash setup or get into your boss setup. And depending on the trial you're in, you could have, a specific setup in this particular add-on to have it set up either by trial. So in this case, this is just sort of general overland stuff. If you're walking into a particular trial like, Kind's Aegis or, Sanity's Edge, you could have a very specific setup for both gear, skills, CP, and food by boss or trash. Or you can have something set up, and it's very easy to do. So I'll just pause here. Does this make sense? Is everyone following? Okay. So if we go, one thing it doesn't, just to keep in mind, is the CP can only, there's a 10-second cooldown. So if you swap using Wizard's Wardrobe, let's say you go into a fight and you click on the wrong one, and you're like, oh crap, I've clicked on the wrong one. I need to go back and click on the right one. Keep in mind that if you click on the right one, if the CP changes between one and the other, you're gonna have to click on it 10 seconds later because everything will change except the CP just because of that cooldown. So, go ahead, question?
Yeah. Just quick question. So, so I use bandits. I know it's really outdated and everything, but that's the only thing I know. it like a lot of things? Like you can't change it once the fight starts. Like you can't.
Correct.
Okay.
That's yeah, that's sort of that's an ESO thing. So the add-ons have to live within the rules of ESO. Yeah, once yeah,
I just
that's
wanted
right.
to double check. Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's just I'll just kind of walk through a quick example of like how you would set this up. So for example, some of these I don't have set up. So for example, I went to like AA, and it'll tell you if you, as you're just setting this up for the first time, by default, there'll always be a trash set up. And then there'll, for each named boss in the trial, there'll always be sort of a template for each one of those. So that's your starting point, is kind of what you're looking at. Now you can add to this list simply like clicking add. There's a little plus symbol down here in the center, and it'll give you another one, and you could change that to, let's say you have, a mage setup 1, and you could have a mage setup 2. So again, it's totally up to you what you want to do. But like for trash, generally what I do is, I would go to sort of my go-to, let's say it's Azure Depths, and I would just equip this one. And then, I would go and come over to the trial I'm going to. And then if you hit shift and then start clicking on these, it'll copy everything over into this setup. So, and if you just hover your mouse button, it'll tell you, what each of these things are for that setup. It'll tell you what food you've got and your skills, your CP, your slottable CP, as well as the gear. Now, if I was doing this by scratch, that would also be another alternative. And so, here you would just go into your skills and you would just start dragging stuff over. So for example, if, let's say on this boss, I wanted to use, a couple of these skills, but, basically you would just start going over to your skills and just start dragging stuff in to that. Now, let's say, I'm just kind of randomly do this. It's probably going to make no sense, but this is for the sake of illustration. Okay, so this is not a real setup. I just didn't want to have you guys waste your guys' time by. Okay, so let's just say this is my setup for Lightning Storm Atronach. Now you'll note that I pulled in the skills right off the skills window. Now the food's not set up. Okay, so if I wanted to pick a different food, I could come over here and find the food that I want. And let's say instead of braised rabbit, I wanted to run Arteum. So literally you drag it over and you drop it over onto the food buff. And again, it's drag and drop. You drag from inventory over to the food buff. CPs is a little bit different. So, you could take your existing CP, if you just hit, again, shift click, drops your existing CP, or if you wanted to change it, you would come into this window. Let's say I wanted to change my red CP up a bit and, drop in rejuvenation. And let's say I want to run Bastion instead. So I've got my CP set up there, and then I would just, again, come in to CP, hit shift click. And you can see, oh wait, did it change? No. Oh, it's because I didn't save it when I was in the CP window. Let's try that again. Okay, so we're going to confirm. And then there we go, it changed. Okay, so you can see it changed. Before I had balanced vitality, bracing anchor, fortified expert evasion. Now it's changed to balanced vitality, bracing anchor, rejuvenation, and bastion. So that's kind of how you set it up from scratch. So you'd basically repeat that for each of these things. Now you'll notice if you go into modify, it tells you the name of the boss. Okay, and you could change the name of this if you want. We'll just say Lightning Boss, and you could save that and it would change the name. But let's say on this empty one, I want to do a different mage setup, but if I go into save, you have to go in and pick the boss. So in this case, we'll pick the mage. Now what that does is when you walk into that room, as soon as you go into a new room and there's a named boss, it'll look off the list that you have and it will automatically slot stuff. So you don't have to go in, you don't have to open this up and click on the setup. It'll automatically change that for you. So that's another thing I really like about Wizards is you don't have to like sit there and click on windows and pick stuff off menus. It just all happens automatically.
Now, what about if you're going from a boss to trash? Does it automatically do the
It does. It does. Yeah. So again, I've never run into a problem, but I've got some OCD issues. So oftentimes I will go in here anyways and just just click on it just to be sure. But I've honestly have never noticed that it didn't swap over.
And could you repeat how you get it to copy? So let's say you.
Yeah. So let's say I've got a, let's go back to general. Let's say I've got this, this setup here. Like this is my favorite setup for boss fights, Coral, Deadly, and Velothi. Okay, so if I equip that setup, I just double click it or click to load, and I want to reuse this over on AA. So let's go to AA, and I want to use it on this boss here. If I hit Shift and I just click each of these 4 things, it copies everything over.
Oh, okay.
So now that particular setup is copied over. Or gear, skills, food, and CP over for this particular boss.
This sounds really nice. It does.
Okay.
It's a very nice add-on.
Yeah. Now there's some more stuff here. Like let's say you wanted to quickly do a new one, and another way of doing gear is just going into your gear setup, and you can completely take everything off. Hit undress. And it takes all of your gear off, and then you can come over here to your gear, and you can like pick what you want, right? So let's say I'm running Turning Tide or something like that. Once you equip everything, again, shift click to your gear, and it'll copy over what you're currently wearing into your setup for whatever menu item you're looking at.
Drag anything? Like when you say equip the gear, so you have that little the icon with the person on the left.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, you could drag. You could.
over.
I think so. No, it doesn't look like you can. I think you can go. You can go over from inventory, maybe. No, it doesn't like that either. The way I usually do it is I will equip what I want to wear, and then I will copy that into the setup. So, for example, let's just pick a bunch of random stuff. Just for sake of doing something weird, we'll do something that makes absolutely no sense. I need jewelry and weapons. Sure, let's do that one. So, okay, so I got everything equipped. Now, if I want to bring that particular gear setup, so you can see in this one, there's nothing there. If I hit shift click, now everything is in there. And so I can now go and swap between that setup, or if I come over here to this setup, it swaps everything in. So yeah, shift click to copy what you have into each of these slots. Or in the case of skills and food, you can literally drag and drop into each of these boxes. Now, one other thing I won't go into, but there is some other more advanced features, like you can set up a pre-buff, which basically allows you to create a pre-buff skill bar. So when you hit your pre-buff macro, it basically will change your skill bar briefly, execute each of those skills, and then it'll swap back into the skill bar that you have set up for that particular fight.
It do the skills, or you still have to do the skills? It
Um,
the add-on, like do the light attack, let's say, that
Correct. Yeah, now this is all before, this is all before combat starts. Okay.
that's awesome. Wow.
So, but because once combat starts, it's locked, the skills are locked in. So basically, you hit your pre-buff, let it run through, and then once it's done, it'll come back into the setup that you've got, and then you would start, the tank would initiate combat. All right, so that's pretty much it for Wizard's Wardrobe. Any last questions before we move on? Hey, talking about add-ons. Okay, so the next one we're going to cover is crutch alerts. Okay, so crutch alerts is unlike other alert add-ons. Crutch alerts displays almost all incoming attacks that are cast on you, and will also display a curated list of casts on other players or the enemy itself that could affect you. It has a pretty large prominent alerts for dangerous or important casts, but keep in mind this particular add-on is not meant to be a replacement for Code's combat alerts or specific trial add-ons, like Q's Rockroof, QCell's Rockroof Helper or whatever. So those are standalone kind of add-ons you may have seen. And this is not meant to replace them. It's sort of meant to supplement those things. So if you actually start to go through some of these menu items, they're not super deep. Basically what it does is it provides some additional supplemental information that you may find helpful. So the way I have mine set up, and again, you can turn the stuff off and on, but the one that you may have seen in some of the streams that actually use this myself is there's an option to have a vertical health bar for the bosses, which allows you to, because the way it's set up is depending on the trial and the fight, it'll actually tell you at what percentage of boss health certain mechanics occur. So as you're going through the fight, you can see what mechanic is coming up. So you're ready for it. And again, this stuff is all movable. It's just that I have mine down here. It's kind of where I like it. This is for Arcanus. Tells you, how many crux you have. So again, everything in this one is movable. I'm gonna actually turn that off. But again, yeah, let me quickly kind of go through this. So there's not a lot of options here, but you can basically have it tell you, if there's certain things being cast on you. A lot of this stuff I've turned off because, there can be such a thing as too much information on the screen. It just starts to clutter things up. So, because what I like is some of the additional information that this add-on provides that are not provided by other add-ons. So for example, Asylum Sectorum, can provide a specific sound if the cone is on you versus other players. Cloud Rest, there's some sounds you can turn on for spears. You can have it turn on to show flare sides, left or right. Also, you can have it color code people that are dead and safe to res. So there's some kind of really useful stuff in here, depending on the trial, that some of the other add-ons do not provide. And again, that's why I like this one. But okay, was there a question?
Not about the crux. Which add-on do you use to?
I use EXOY's Crux Tracker, but I'm not going to talk about that. But that's the one I would recommend. Yeah.
I just have that one, and it looks different from what you had, so that's all.
Well, yeah, because it's a different add-on. I don't actually use the crux tracker in crutch alerts. I use the XOYs.
That one. Yeah, I use the EXO one.
Yeah.
Mine looks different from yours. Like you showed those three squares. But I might have mine set up different.
Well, no, I don't use that. The add-on you saw was crutch alerts. That's not what I use.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, do you see that number in the middle of my reticle?
Yes. Yes.
That's what I use. That tells me how many crux I've got. So, that plus I have a little sound set up for XOYs. Did you hear that little click sound? When I hit 3, did you hear that? I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it tells me that I'm good to beam. It basically goes beep. That's my audio cue that okay, time to beam. Okay, so let's move on. Were there any questions on crutch alerts before we move on to the next one? So why don't we go to Elms markers? Now, Elms markers, you probably have seen. Is there anybody that's not heard of Elms markers? Okay, but basically all it is it shows markers on the ground so people know where things should be either be placed or where they should be standing based on what the raid leader has instructed team members to do. So sometimes, again, depending on the trial and depending on the boss fight, there may be specific areas where things are going to happen or where you need to be standing. And those things can be customized through this add-on. So let me go ahead and take a look at it. So this is Elms markers. And in order to get this to work is you need to import a text string. So usually, depending on the trial lead will have you copy and paste in sort of the script for it. So in fact, let me show you kind of what that looks like. So I'm actually going to bring one over from the VSC hard mode I run. So if I copy the script and paste it in, this is kind of what it looks like. It's just a bunch of numbers with hash marks. But this is the code that it uses in order to translate what markers to put down and specifically where to put them in the trial. So once you copy that and paste it in config, you select import and it'll import that in. And as soon as you do that, you don't need to run a reload or anything. You should be able to see it if you're in the right room. If somebody's asking, if somebody does not have the config script and you have it already set up, once it's imported, you can, you'll see it here in the config. You could literally highlight the whole thing, hit Control-C to copy it to your clipboard, and then paste it into a message. So that's basically how you export it to share it. It's very easy to set up Elms markers with new markers on the ground. If you hit, hold on. Let's see.
Talking about Elms?
Yeah, I think it's /. Yeah, I think it's /Elms. There we go. So here, once you hit /Elms, it brings up a brand new UI, and so you can start to place stuff. So depending on the trial and the room you're in, and let's say you're the raid lead, and you want everybody to know like where to stand. Like, okay, for this fight, we're going to stand in this spot. It'll place a marker based on where you are standing at the time. So let's say I want a square, an orange square, and I place that. Okay. That's what they're going to see. Okay. They're going to see an orange square like, okay, guys, import the script. Do you guys see the orange square? That's where we're all going to stack. So that way there's no confusion in the midst of battle. People know exactly where they need to go to. Again, you have to, like, once you do all of this, let's say, I come over here and say, okay, that's position 1, and then we're going to have a couple of range DPS. We're going to come over here and we'll make this the pink square. And we'll place that. Okay. So you say, okay, range DPS, you're on pink square. So let's say that, again, this is just a very stupid example, but I think you guys get the point. So once that's done, if we close that and then go back to our add-ons, so those squares, those positions and markers, that's the config script. So this is what I would copy and share with my team. Okay, and then once they import it, they would be able to see the symbols that I put down. And you can change the size of these. So the alert size basically is this little slider. So for example, if I make them really small, they would be small. And you could also make them pretty big so they're hard to miss. Okay, good. Okay, so let's clear those because I don't want those in my base. Okay, they're gone. All right, so that's Elm's markers. Pretty lightweight, easy add-on. Very, very useful, particularly for raid leads that want folks to easily know like where they should be. The next one is Audi support icons. Okay. So there's kind of a lot. I mean, this is a pretty simple add-on, but in its most simplest form, this gives players the ability to put specific icons above players' heads, based off, their team members' roles or specific friends or people they're supposed to be, let's say we have left-right teams or you're partnered with somebody. If you can't find them quickly, you can assign them a custom symbol. Or if they are running Horrors and they paid for a customized symbol, like you would see their symbol above their head. So for example, I've got a Horrors icon that shows basically my Hi-Mage face above my head. So people know very easily like where I'm at if they're running this. But if we go to add-ons, and again, there's kind of a lot of options, but the general settings basically says how big do you want these, and how far above the person's head do you want to do it, like super high. If there's a lot of uneven terrain, particularly in a PvP type setting, sometimes you want you may not have direct line of sight. Sometimes it's helpful. The opacity, the distance at which it starts to fade, and so on. So all of that's customizable. And then there's all different types of icons that are grouped by type, and there's settings for each of these types. So for group icons, this is really talking about the role. So you can assign a specific icon to the leader. Let's say it's a crown. In my case, I prefer sort of a magenta crown for the raid lead. And then tanks will have a yellow shield. And the way I've set it for healers is their red cross, because they're healers. Damage dealers are blue swords, cross swords. And that's pretty much it. So, in fact, I've turned off the DPS. It's just too busy. So for me, I want to know where the tanks and healers and raid leader are. So those are the ones that I've turned on in my case. Now you can customize this any way you want. You can, have all types of symbols. Again, it gets a little bit too busy for me. But in my case, I just have tanks and healers set up, and then the raid lead as well, because oftentimes a raid lead will say stack on crown, so it's good to have a crown above the crown's head. You could have allies, for example, if you're in open world, and you can assign specific symbols to allies. I pretty much have turned all of it off. Custom icons such as Hodors. So again, I'm not going to kind of go through the exhaustive list here, but again, this is an icon type add-on that if you're in a raid, it's helpful to kind of know where specific people in the raid are at all times. Any questions on that?
One thing you didn't mention that I find really helpful with Odie's is the dead person.
Oh yeah. Really, yeah. Yep. Um, let's see. Yeah, I think it's under. No, it's group icons. Dead player. Okay. So Josine brought up a really good point. So this is particularly helpful for dead players. So oftentimes you'll have people that are dead and you want to know, before you start resing, is somebody else resing them? Have they already been res, but they just have not gotten up, or are they dead and no one's gotten to them yet? So you can color code them. So the way I have mine, I think this is default, is white means they're just dead. They're waiting for res. If they're orange, again, this is the skull icon. Again, you can change that, but I use the skull one for dead people. If they have an orange skull, it means somebody is in the process of resing them. And green means they already have a res, they just have not gotten up yet to take it. So this is also a really helpful part of Odie's. Any other comments? Okay, we will go to Hoarders next. Okay, so if a quick sales pitch, if you want a custom icon for Odie's, that in fact you may have seen some if you go, for example, to the guild list, and you select the roster, you see these little icons here. Like, I've got my little Hi-Mage one. These are Hodor icons that people have paid for. And then these are what show up if they're running Odie's support icons. This is what will actually show up above people's heads. Again, you can turn that off if you want to, but if you're interested in one or wonder like, how did they get that? It's because through Hoarders, the actual developer, you can go to their website, and I don't recall the current price. I think it's like 2 or 3 million gold. They will create a static one. If you want one that's animated, it'll cost a little bit more. Anyways, so what does Hoarders do? Hoarders basically does two things. It shares your ultimate. So if the raid leader, most raid leaders want to know whose ultimate is up and ready to use, so they can call it. So for example, they may say, okay, John, I want you to do Warhorn, and Susie, give me your barrier. And they need to know if it's ready or not before they're calling for it. And so this tells them what your ultimate status is. And the other thing it does is it allows you to share your DPS, your current DPS. So people can actually see, like, who's doing the best DPS, like, how much DPS are they actually getting for the team and who's providing it. DPS also generally want to see how they're doing relative to the other team members, to see, if they're, maybe need to pick it up a bit. And so Hoarders allows them to track that. So if you actually look at what's here, it's not a long list. It's a fairly short menu. But basically you would have to turn it on. And then obviously, the UI you can turn off and you can move stuff around. So for example, here's my Warhorn. It tells me if it's up and ready. When it's ready, if my ultimate is ready, it'll actually start to flash and say that, I can pop my Warhorn if I want to. And then you can turn some of the stuff off and on. Show damage. In my case, if I'm DPS, I almost always have this turned on, so I can share it. A lot of raid leaders want to see people's DPS. And then, you can turn off and on a lot of this other stuff. So, you know, you can just kind of scroll through here and take a look, like, you know, ulti point, show percentage, you know, Colossus, if you're a Necro, and so on. All right. The DPS, what it'll do, it'll basically show a small table. You see this little thing. This is where I usually keep my DPS on my screen. But it'll basically show a table with people's names, and it'll show in descending order the amount of DPS by person on the team for the most recent fight. Okay, so let's turn that off. Whoops. Okay. Any questions on Hodors? All right, let's go to the one that's very complex, but it's actually one of my favorites, is Surrendars, however you pronounce that. Now, this add-on, I'll forewarn you, while I love it and it's great, it's endlessly customizable. And because of the high level of customization, it's inherently going to have much more complexity to it in terms of how to set it up to give you that ability to customize it any way you want. But basically what this does is it replaces the game's limited built-in buff and debuff tracking. And it gives you the ability to customize that display and the effects on yourself as well as others, and place them anywhere on the screen you want. You can blacklist or hide certain buffs, debuffs. You can customize, you know, how long things are displayed. You can just customize the size of it. So I'll show you briefly. I'm not going to go through everything, but I'll kind of show you kind of what it does and sort of a very simple setup. So just to give you a quick demo, if you look at my screen and you look on the far right-hand side over here, do you see where it says Minor Aegis, Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, Major Gallop, Major Brutality, Thief, Mundus, and then my food buff. So these are what they are called long-term or permanent buffs. And this is Surrendars here. I've placed it here because it's out of the way, but allows me to see, okay, do I have a food buff active? I can quickly see that at a glance. I can see what my Mundus is, and what my long-term buffs are. Now, if you can also see when I place my cursor on the target, you'll see it has certain permanent debuffs. So what I've listed, again, that's Surrendar. If you look here, just to the right side of my character, it says Major Breach, Major Vulnerability, Minor Breach, Minor Brittle, Minor Vulnerability. Those are all active debuffs on this target dummy that, just being a target dummy, a trial dummy, that's the way ESO has set it up. Now, if I start, you know, parsing on this thing, you can see on the left-hand side, just above my health and resource bars, you can see some active buffs. Those are short-term buffs. So Fated, Fortune, Harness, Quintessence, Inspired Scholarship, Quick Cloak. Those are all things that are short-term buffs. I can actually take a quick glance and see what's active and when it's going to come on cooldown. And now on the right-hand side, you can see some of the debuffs that are going on target based on the skills that I'm using. Okay, so all of that stuff is Surrendars. It's telling me exactly what are my active buffs, what are my active debuffs on target, and so on. All of that is done through Surrendars. Now, ESO's base game provides similar information, probably not to the level of detail, but what it does is it provides icons that are literally spread out all the way across the bottom or top of your screen. Again, you can move that. But they're so large and there's so many of them, and because you don't have the ability to filter them, most people probably don't even look at them. I know I didn't. So that's, again, another use case or reason why you may want to use Surrendars, because it allows you to filter that list to only show the ones you're interested in. And you can, again, make them any size you want to, and you can put them in a place on your screen where they're very easy to look at. So let me pause there. Any questions on kind of what Surrendar does or why you would use it?
I installed Srendar a long time ago, and I just didn't have the time to invest to figure it out and everything. So I ended up uninstalling it just because of the complexity of it. And honestly, um, switching over to PC from a console, I wasn't quite used to that on, so I was like,
Hmm.
this is too much for me, and I ended up getting rid of it. But now that I see it kind of broken down into the way you're doing it here, um, I think I might get it back actually.
Yeah, I'll just spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes to kind of walk through a very basic setup. So if we go back into Shrendars, you first start off with general, and the way I would do this if it was my first time is get on the character you play the most often, and you can have a very basic setup. And maybe you just start off with these long-term buffs. Like you want to know, like, what are my long-term buffs on? And you could set this up and have, if you go into, again, settings, general, if you go to general options, you can have this set up, or excuse me, for profiles, you can use an account-wide profile. Meaning once you set it up on one character, that setup, the way you have Shrendar configured on your screen, will be done exactly the same across all of your characters, which is the way I do it, because I don't like having to change things unless it's very specific. Let's say I just mostly heal, then I maybe just have a custom one just for my healers. But the way I have mine basically is I have one setup. It's the same for all my characters. That way I kind of know what I'm looking at. And I don't have to like change my way of thinking because I've got a different setup based on each character. So as far as options, these buttons up here, general, filters, cast bar, these are your main menu items. So as you change each one, there's going to be a set of sub-menu options underneath it. So for example, if I hit general, if I scroll through here, these are all my general settings. If I go into filters, this is what's going to filter out the different buffs and debuffs that I want to see or don't want to see. Cast bar allows me to change the way those things look on my screen in terms of, the font and how big they are. And then the aura display changes where they're actually displayed on the screen. Okay, so those are the four things that you're changing. So if we kind of quickly go through, and the very first thing I'll show you is if you think of your buffs and debuffs, they're broken down into a lot of different groupings. So you've got short-term buffs, and again, you can define what short-term buff means. So if we go down to, let's see, short buffs threshold, I have mine set up to 60 seconds or less. So anything longer than 60 seconds is a long-term buff. If it's under 60 seconds or under, then it's short-term. So those are my short-term buffs, long buffs, passive buffs, toggled buffs, proc cooldowns. So all these different things, you can decide whether or not you want to look at them or not. So you can see in a lot of these, I have them actually turned off. Like I already have another add-on for cooldowns. I don't care about ground AoEs. Major buffs, minor buffs, are just too many of them to begin cluttering up my screen. So I made the decision, I don't really care. Again, you can display these and then actually go into the filter list and filter out specific ones that you want to see. But for me, it was simpler to just say, you know what, there's too many of them. I don't really care. I'm not going to look at them. But again, endlessly customizable. You can, if there's a specific minor buff or major buff you're interested in, you can set this up to display those. And then, the target buffs, target debuffs. So like, I'm really interested in like what debuffs are hitting the boss. So I have that turned on. And I want to know like what buffs I've got. So I'm showing both short and long term. Now, once I decide what I want to look at, in this case, I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. I'm just looking at short, long buffs, passives, proc cooldowns, enchantment procs, and target buffs. I can make a decision on where, like, where I want to actually see those. So you can see short buffs is display window number 4. And long buffs are display window 6, as well as my passives. So if I go into the aura display, and let's take a look at example auras. So, whoops. So if I click on each one of these buttons represent the different display windows. A lot of these I have actually turned off. So if I go back to general, the ones that I'm actually using in my case are Windows 4, 6, 9, and 8. I've combined some of these together into like a one window. So for example, long-term and passive buffs are displayed in Windows 6. Short-term buffs are Windows 4. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's Windows 6. Those are long-term and passives. These target debuffs, they're popping up kind of middle of the screen. Those are Windows 8. Okay. So
Can you move those windows around to where you need
you
it?
can. Absolutely. Yeah. So if I go to unlock, okay, this is what I was looking for. So this shows me, okay, so I've got my long-term and passives are 6. That's the one over here that I'm moving around on the right. Number 4 is my short buffs. And I have those displayed right above my resources. And then my enchant procs and cooldowns are down here on the bottom side. So all the information on my left-hand side where near my resources, that's all about me and what I've got going on. Number 8 are the debuffs on target. And I have this showing right above the target health. So that's number 8. So all these other ones you see on the center on the screen, those can be moved anywhere you want. But if they're not used to show anything, they don't show up at all. So again, you can move those to anywhere you want. And again, you can change how long things are displayed. You can change the size of the font, the colors, all of that. So let's go ahead and go back. We'll go ahead and lock it, which causes those to go away. But yeah, it's pretty much it. It's kind of simple. As I mentioned, there's a lot here to kind of go through. But my recommendation is try just setting up 1 or 2 things. Like, don't try and over-engineer it. Run it for a couple weeks, and then as you begin to using it, it'll start to make more sense in terms of like what you can do with it. Any questions on Shrindars?
Can it be used to set up like for healers for tracking?
Oh yeah.
I guess that's how you use group buffs.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for example, if we go into filters, we can go to, let's say, you can add specific things to this list. So you can either, add things that you want to track, or if you want to track everything, you can remove stuff from the list. And then once you have group buffs, the group buffs you want to see, you would basically assign it to a particular window and then place that window in a spot where you want to monitor it. Okay, just given the time, we got one more to go, and that is one of my all-time favorites as DPS, and that is Combat Metronome.
I use it on my healers too.
Yeah. So what Combat Metronome is it tracks your heavy and light attack swings as well as your global cooldowns. So if you're familiar with light attack weaving, that's probably the most common use case is to optimize your light attack weaving so you can improve your overall damage output, because as you're aware, most skills, or actually all skills, are on a 1 second global cooldown. So as soon as you cast it, and however long the skill takes to complete, after it completes, there's 1 second of wait time before you can cast another skill. That's essentially what it tracks. Now, light attacks are also on a 1 second cooldown, meaning you can only do one light attack per second. So, back to the theory of light attack weaving, you basically, while you're on cooldown on a skill, you can hit a light attack, and as soon as your light attack is fired off, you can immediately go right into your next skill after 1 second has passed. And that's essentially what it tracks. So if you look at my screen, I have mine set up. So if you see that, if you look at my skill bar right beneath my feet, do you see that yellow bar with the red square? That is Combat Metronome. So the way you typically use this as a DPS is, and it's not using an Arcanist who beams a lot. It's not the best demonstration, but you essentially fire up a skill, and as soon as you reach the red part on the bar, you go right into your next light attack and immediately follow up with a skill. So in fact, let's just do a couple, and I'm not going to beam here because I don't want to bother, but you would basically do something like this. So you basically want to do a light attack. As soon as it hits the red bar, you're light attacking and immediately going into the next skill. And by doing that, as long as you have a really good rotation of what skills to go to in your rotation, that would maximize your damage for your character and class, okay, depending on how it's set up. But that's basically it. So why don't we go into the settings? Not a lot to it. If you actually this is the whole menu here, so it's not super deep. But the very first thing is, like, where do you want to see this? And for me, position, to actually get the most use out of it, was fairly important. I wanted it so it wasn't too far out of my peripheral vision, and yet I don't want it like in the way either. So I found, for me, it works best to have it like right near my feet, and have it right near my bar. So, if I need to refer or glance at my skill bar quickly, I can glance at it, and I can also keep track in my bottom peripheral vision, like where I'm at from a timing standpoint, just so when I'm, in combat and doing damage, I can maximize my damage just by getting good light attack weaving done. So you can change the size, you can change the position, you can change the colors that's displayed. And then there's other things that you can add if you want to, such as if you want to track your ultimate, stamina levels, and a lot of that I don't need because I've got other things on the screen already doing that for me. So for me, I've turned all of that off. Really what I'm using is just the bar, the visual. And then you can change additional settings depending on if you have, certain latency periods. I tended to go with the automated options here. You can make adjustments to, global heavy attacks and so on if you think that's helpful to you. Let's say, if you feel like it's going too fast and you can't keep up, you can slow it down. You can also change, modify things. If certain things have a sort of a warm-up cast time. So I know there's certain skills where if you click it, there's a channel time before it fires off. So you can adjust for that by adding that skill and selecting, adding some additional time for the channel time. So it won't throw off the global cooldown timer. And lastly, if you want to completely drive yourself insane, you can add on the audio cue that basically will give you a little ping that tells you essentially when you should be light attacking and going into the next skill. I've tried that personally. I don't like it, but I've actually have seen some streams where people use that.
Remember your piano lesson days.
Yeah. So I'm sure some of you guys use this, but any other comments, questions? Nope. Is it completely confusing, or is that did it all must have made perfect sense?
Absolutely, it was very good. Thank you. I especially enjoyed the Wizard's Wardrobe and the Srendar. I tried to use that once, and like just ahead, I deleted it.
Yeah.
It was just way too much information all over my screen. But I think I'm gonna try your suggestion of, trying to add one or two things and then see
Mm-hmm.
how it goes, or especially the 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 permanent buffs on the right. That's kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, oftentimes I'm like, especially if I've got a character where I'm switching Mundus back and forth, it's good. I can just glance and quickly see what Mundus I'm running. And if I have an active food buff, I don't have to go into any menus or anything. All right. Well, that's pretty much, yeah, you're very welcome. So, again, I've streamed this, so it's there. You can rewatch it. If you have questions, feel free to reach me and let me know how I can help.